Welcome to the last talk of the day. So I guess you're the most interested people. Yes, so I'll be talking about my adventures of adding controller support to Factorio, porting it to Nintendo Switch, to Steam Deck, and all of this stuff. Some context is who doesn't know Factorio? Okay, one person. Two? I wanted to ask the opposite question, but I think it's simpler to just ask who doesn't know it. So I guess the game doesn't need much introductions. I would say most important things to take away here is that for 11 years, controller support was never considered in Factorio. It was just always a mouse and keyboard game, start to finish. We never thought about it. Second thing is that it was mostly my pet project, so it was just me, so no big stuff like rewriting the UI and stuff like that. So everything, I had to figure it out mostly myself, so that was that's how it was going. Quick summary, first I will talk more in the context of Nintendo Switch, because first thing, I just brought the game to Nintendo Switch. So I will talk about how I was trying to make the gameplay with controllers. After that, I brought it to PC, so some challenges there, some more things to do there. I will talk a bit about unique features you can use on PC. Since it's PC Master Race, you can do anything and everything. So, and I will briefly go over Steam input, just should I have considered it, and Steam Deck at the end. Okay, so actually, since there's so many people interested in Factorio, maybe I'll start with an anecdote that when I started working, I first played the game and I was looking at the complexity of the recipes and everything, and I'm like, man, these guys must have some incredible spreadsheets to balance all this out, and some super complicated formulas and some systems and everything. And then I started working and realized there was none of that. It was just you play it and you see, well, this doesn't work. Let's change this number, and I think that will work. So maybe that's foreshadowing for this presentation.
That's okay.
So we were actually having a blog post, and we wanted to be like, well, we're not going to bring the game to any consoles because we're not really interested in that. But I was really interested in the Nintendo Switch, so I was like, hey, I actually want to do that. So I started doing it. Obviously, there's a lot of technical stuff about Nintendo Switch, but today we're talking just about controllers. So we need to talk about the elephant in the title of the presentation. The game has a lot of actions. It's a pretty complicated game, so you look at this and you wonder, like, okay, where the hell do I start? How do I put all of these actions onto only 16 buttons? And the answer is you play games, obviously. Okay, that's not that doesn't make much sense, so let me explain. First, the main thing is you need to figure out controllers in and out, and basically, you need to play a lot of console games and see how they do stuff. And not necessarily because they do things well, but because players are used to the way they do things. And that's why I mentioned popular games, and especially in the context of the Nintendo Switch, I mentioned the popular games there, because someone who's going to play Factorio on the Nintendo Switch very likely has played one of the massive Nintendo games. So they're kind of used to the controls there, they're kind of used to the techniques used there. So as much inspiration as I can take, it's going to be helpful. And it's also inspiration. It's like I get ideas, oh, they do it this way, they do it this way, maybe I can use this technique too. And that's why I also mentioned similar games and ports, because that's where I can draw quite a lot of inspiration. And so what you get to is you kind of get a feel for some unwritten standards. If you play enough of console games, I guess you can agree that it kind of works like this, I would say. These are generally the buttons. You aim with left trigger, you shoot with right trigger. Left bumper is usually the weapon wheel. The D-pad you usually use to change abilities or equip things. So left stick is for movement, right stick is for camera. That's very common, regardless of game. The two system buttons, usually one is the pause menu and one is like the journal codex or stuff like that. The main buttons, sometimes the top one is the jump, the one is the melee. The two buttons, confirm and back, these are quite important. And those are the main interactions. So armed with this knowledge, let's see how we can maybe do it in Factorio. Well, the movement is simple. Left stick to move, right stick to move the cursor and select entities around you. So we got that. Pause menu and the map. Pause menu is simple. The other one is like usually codex and stuff. So in our case, map. So main action. In our case, whatever is mapped to click. So build stuff, select stuff, open the entity of the GUI. So I put it on the main action button, the main interact button. That's usually in the standard. The back one, the cancel button or the back button, usually I put a clear cursor, because I think that's what most people would have struggled with. So that's what made sense to me. The top one, I just put character in there, the main character window, because it's a button we use very often in Factorio. The next, so now I'm kind of left with what to put on Y, and the main button we use for very common actions is right click. So right click. Actions that have been mapped to right click, I map them on Y. Next is modifiers. We use a lot of modifiers, like if you click, you do something. If you shift click, you do something else. If you click somewhere, you take an item. If you shift click, you transfer the inventory. So to keep it simple, I basically took these and put them on the triggers, which are typically used as modifiers. You usually press them with something else. So this basically solved me quite a lot of mapping and thinking, and also solved quite a lot of technical things, because in Factorio, technically, everything is made with mouse and keyboard. So modifiers are considered like control and shift, and they're quite hard-coded everywhere. So I took a shortcut and hard-coded control and shift on the triggers, and it solved quite a lot of issues. Right trigger is usually shoot, right bumper is close enough, so we shoot with that. Radial menu is usually left button, so that's where I put my radial menu. So is there anything? Oh yeah, rotate with left and right D-pads and more stuff to the D-pad. So basically, by playing games, understanding the standards, looking at the standards. Not only this gave me a starting point, like to know where to start with all these 153 actions, because if you look at that, you have no idea where to start. But by having this map of standards and then trying to apply it to what we have, it gave me a starting point. But what I think is maybe even more important is it makes the controls intuitive to new players, because they're used to these controls, they are in other games, and I pick it up, okay, I don't need to look at the controls to know left is move, right stick is to control stuff, A is for the main action, and so on. So by being as close as possible to these unwritten standards, I think it gave me a good starting point. Obviously, it's not that simple, like it took 5 minutes here, it took maybe a few months in practice, it's a lot of iteration, you put the button, you try it, and then it's like, okay, this doesn't really feel right, let's try again. So iterate, iterate, iterate. It's something we do very often. Yeah, I think that's it for this part. With so many controls, it's obviously very easy to get lost in, so I try to... We already put them in tooltips and quite many places. We put shortcuts. Something new that I added specifically for controller is the help section in the corner, where contextually, depending on what you have picked up or what, basically the context of the game that you're currently in, it shows you the most relevant key bindings, the most relevant controls for that situation. So this way you don't really get lost, and you also don't need to open the control screen and look over 153 and it's like, how do I do this? No, the game will tell you the most important ones. So that's kind of control sets. So what about the things on the main screen? Because these are designed with mouse and keyboard in mind, so they are meant to be clicked, or in the case of the quick bar at the bottom, you use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't have that many buttons on a controller, so I'm not gonna just put a button for every single shortcut you put there. And moving a virtual cursor to click some UI element on the main screen is a big no-no. Don't do this lazy console port of, oh, I just create a virtual cursor and I finished the console port of this PC game. So the very common, the cornerstone of inputting stuff with controller is radial menus. So that was the obvious answer. So I take these and I made my own kind of Factorio-ish radial menu of this circle, this square circle. And I put the quick bar in its tab, the tools in its tab, and the panels in its tab. So you navigate this with a D-pad and you select it with a stick, and it's a very reasonable input method for controller. And maybe some demo of kind of how it feels in game. It's a lot of, again, this is a lot of experimentation, and there's a lot of details. For example, you select the item by, because you open the radial menu by holding the bumper, you select something, you release the bumper, the selection gets selected. You can also select it with the A button, because why not? Because we select a lot of stuff with A in the rest of the game, so this felt like it should work. Another thing that was experimented with is sticky selection. So when I select up with the stick and then I release the stick, the selection stays to the up. And why I did that is because when releasing the bumper to confirm the selection, I noticed that I intuitively release both the stick and the bumper. So sometimes the stick would be released first So it would clear the selection, and then I release the bumper, and I'm like, wait, why did nothing get selected? So by playtesting with that, I realized, well, I probably want this to be sticky. So these are one of the many details that were found by testing, playing the game, and well, this doesn't feel right. Why doesn't feel right? And stuff like that. What about the UI? So we did all of this mapping actions that are like to direct keys. So I put them in a controller, but the game has hundreds of UIs. And unfortunately, making UIs in Factorio is quite a pain because they're all C++. So making new UI for controllers was out of the question. Definitely not gonna do that. So I somehow needed to make it work with all the layouts that currently exist in game, or to make just minor changes. Like you saw, I already made some changes with the main screen. I removed these elements, put them in a new GUI element. So it's not like absolutely no change, but try to keep them to a minimum. There's no going and rewriting every single UI to make it optimized for controller. So I had to figure out basically a heuristic algorithm of this is the UI, this is the layout. The game needs to figure out how to navigate it with the stick. And to put it very simply, I will try to make an example and go into technical details. Let's say we have this layout. Let's say the current selection is on this pipette thing. Let me see if I can draw again. So I am on this pipette and I want to select the widget on the right. So I put right on my stick. So the game needs to figure out, okay, what widget do I select on the right? First thing it does, it looks to the right, rightmost edge of this widget, and everything it doesn't intersect with, it discards it. So these, is it drawing? Yeah. These are completely discarded because they're completely not on the right side. Notice that these items on the right, they're technically under, but I consider them on the right. So if these were the only widgets, if I press right, the game would actually say, okay, the closest widget is the 50 splitters, the item in that top right. So because you kind of expect it to work, I would say so. But in this case, it then takes all the widgets and calculates some distance to it, some heuristic distance. It's a heuristic algorithm with a million magic variables, but very simply, it's like the distance, like x squared plus y squared, but it's weighted heavily on the direction that you're trying to go. So in this case, the distance to each widget is x squared plus 10 multiplied by y squared. So going to the right is cheap, and going up and down, even if it's tilted on the right, is very expensive. So it will very heavily prefer widgets on the right, directly on the right. And if there's no widget on the right, it starts going up, 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 or down, down. It's going vertically. So let's say in this case, the obvious answer is this tab. It's when I select right, it selects this widget because it's directly on the right. The distance is the smallest, so that's the widget it selects. But let's say if this row didn't exist, then it goes up to either this or this. Well, the crafting tab, because that's the closest one height-wise. So that's like the very basic of kind of how the algorithm works. So to iterate, basically, I had to figure out how to make it work with this. Why is it not playing? So how to make it work with all the existing GUIs, and the answer was just a heuristic algorithm that looks at the existing layout and tries to figure out for your input what is the best one. And I explained the super basic thing, but yeah, it's again more experimentation. I go and I'm like, okay, I figured it out. Then I go into some UI that I didn't test, and it's like, wait, why is it selecting the wrong widget? And then debugging and tweaking magic values until everything just works. So then it was released on Switch. It was generally well received. Obviously, it's not as good as mouse and keyboard. Like, if I managed in a few months to make a better input than we did in 11 years, then I would be some miracle worker. So mouse and keyboard is still the preferred way to play, but if you really want it on the Nintendo Switch on the go, or on the Steam Deck, or on the couch, then you can play that way now. The GUI navigation is the weakest point, I would say. If there's something I could have spent a lot more time on, if I had 20 people working on this project, then I would rewrite the whole GUI to make the layouts and UI interaction work, be designed completely with controller in mind and not with mouse and keyboard. 80, the title says 153 actions, it's clickbait. The reality is I only mapped 80 actions because I realized, well, I don't need to map. Do these actions really need to be mapped to a physical button? Not really. I can put it in some GUI. I can, I don't need to map it, and also a lot of actions are mapped to the same button, and depending on the context, either this happens or that happens. So the number is much larger than it maybe seems. This is the number of copies sold. I don't think it's very relevant to the presentation, but I thought I included it. It's not much, so if you plan to go on Nintendo Switch, don't expect you're gonna like. Factorio sold 1 million copies, so 61,000 seems like completely nothing. Like, what was the point of all this? But this is completely within expectation, and if you do the math, 61,000 copies is pretty good, especially consider it's one-man project almost. Like the other people of the team help, so I don't want to be like I'm a one-man team. Okay, so I did controller support for Switch. I did the hard part, right? I mapped all the actions to the PC, to the controller. It works, it plays. So doing it on PC is super simple. It's just the same thing on PC, right? Not so fast. So first you need to support multiple controller types. Officially, it's like Xbox is the controller for the PC, but if someone wants to play with the PlayStation controller, why should he not be? If someone wants to play with the Joy-Cons, especially since they're nice because you can detach them, why shouldn't he? Or if someone has some weird controller, maybe he wants to play it with it. So in our case, we use SDL as our backend. So what SDL does, of all things, it maps all of this to an Xbox 360 controller. So in the game, API-wise, I just call the SDL function, and they say, okay, the A button was pressed, but the A button can be the B button on a Switch Pro controller or some other thing. So SDL manages the layout and everything. In Unity, I know it's like some generic controller with north, north, south, west, east buttons, so stuff like that. The main point is that you need to know that the A button is always the bottom button, and the Y button is always the top button. So when I map stuff to the top button, is the top button regardless of what controllers are connected. And so all of this is abstracted away from me when I do the layout and think of this stuff. So yeah, supporting dealing with multiple controller types. And now we go into the first problem, which if you use the switch, you switch or another console, you know exactly what I mean. That the standard says that the bottom button is confirmed on, I call it the Western standard, this is the name I gave it. And the Eastern Nintendo standard is that the confirm is on the right side. So it's the first headache you have to deal with. And I would say, given the popularity of the Nintendo Switch, because someone is going to play on the Nintendo Switch and then they're going to play with your game on a PC and they're like, I kind of want it to work with that layout that I'm used to. Why do I have to rewire my brain every time? You know the pain if you had to deal with it. It's a major pain, especially if you play on multiple consoles. It's very annoying. So if you are to handle something, please handle this situation and make it as easy as possible for players to switch. Okay, I'm used to this standard or I'm used to this standard. I'm used to playing on a Nintendo Switch, so on a PC I want to play like that. Or I'm used to playing Xbox games, so I want to play like that. The solution was really simple. Well, not implementation-wise, but from a user perspective, I just give the option exactly like this in-game where you select, okay, which one is select and cancel, which one are you used to, you select this drop-down and it all works as you expected. Basically, it just reverses the two buttons internally. So that's the first problem. Next is on-screen keyboards. On Nintendo Switch, I have the on-screen keyboard they provide, no problems. On any other console, again, they provide the API of the on-screen keyboard, you implement it, it's fine. But what do you do on PC? There's no on-screen keyboard on PC. So the Steam on-screen keyboard, it only works for Steam games. So if you don't want to release on Steam already, it's like complete no. It only works on Steam Big Picture when Steam Big Picture is open, which is such a weird limitation. So it's a big no, I would say. Like, okay, it's fine for Steam Deck, but otherwise it's not a generic solution at all. And I wrestled so much with their API that I absolutely hate it. It's still not, because they did the Steam Deck and they're still fixing stuff, and well, it's working. So what do? You can roll your own. In this example, this is Lost Ark. They implement this. If you roll your own, make sure to add an option to disable it, because some people who play on PC with a controller have the keyboard right in front of them and they're like, well, I have the keyboard here. Why do I have input with this annoying on-screen keyboard? Just allow me to disable it. But at the same time, there might be people that are like, okay, I just play from the couch. I don't want to reach to my physical keyboard. So having an on-screen keyboard would be nice. The second option is just don't do it and expect players are just going to have a keyboard connected. This is what I decided to do in Factorio, and people didn't complain about it. So it seems people are kind of used to just having a keyboard connected, or if they're on the couch, they probably have a wireless keyboard, or they're used to just go and type what they need on the keyboard. So 2 worked fine. I think 1 is best. So that's the on-screen keyboard. Next problem is glyphs, because on Nintendo Switch, again, Nintendo provided all the glyphs for me, put them in game, very easy, no problems. But now I have like I said in the beginning, you should support multiple controller types. So now you have to deal with the glyphs yourself. You have to show correct glyphs for Xbox controller, PlayStation controller, Switch controller, depending on what the person has connected. So now you have to bring your own glyphs. Luckily, someone was kind enough to make a library. He saw the problem and it's like, I'm going to solve this for everyone. It's almost becoming, and he made this pack. It's almost becoming a standard. It's used in like 300 games, probably way more. 300 games was some time ago. So it's kind of an unofficial standard almost. If you look at them, you might recognize them in some high-profile games even. So that's one way. I don't really like them because they're not very high contrast. You need to have them big. So in our case, with our small UI and very concentrated UI with information, I can't have these huge images. So I decided to roll my own, to make our own. If you decide to make your own, try to kind of respect the standard shapes. So like for PlayStation, it's this semi-oval, half-oval. For the Xbox, there's these wings for the trigger. So if you're going to make your own, try to kind of make it with these shapes because these are the shapes they're used to. Players are kind of used to seeing. With the glyphs, another annoying thing was that Valve, in their infinite wisdom, or I hope it was for legal reasons because I can't explain why, they decided that although the Steam Deck tries to be an Xbox controller, they decided to label the triggers and the bumpers differently. On Xbox, it's LT, LB. On Steam Deck, it's L1, L2. So now if you have Xbox glyphs, it's gonna say press LT and you're like, where is LT? On my Steam Deck, there is no LT. So another set of glyphs and another platform, another controller type you need to detect, even though officially it's kind of like an Xbox controller, but in reality you see it's not. So for this, I added also another drop-down. It tries to auto-detect, but auto-detection is kind of annoying for technicalities I won't go into, so it doesn't work perfectly. When it doesn't work, especially on Steam Deck, you can I put this option in. Or maybe even you're used to, for example, maybe you're used to Nintendo Switch glyphs because you play on Nintendo Switch, but on PC you have an Xbox controller because that's where you're used to connecting, but you want to see the Nintendo Switch game, so why not give the player the option? Okay. So that's with kind of extra problems. If there's anything that you should solve the most, I would say is this, because if it's so annoying as me as a player having to deal with this problem, so if more games solve this problem, I would be very happy. And it was one of the most common complaints when I mentioned controller support. A few players are like, okay, how are you going to deal with this situation? Because you know it exists. So my initial response was just go and remap all the buttons, but it's a pain in the ass. So a drop down, super easy, so very user friendly. Okay. I said PC Master Race, and you can use a lot of features. If you want to go the extra mile, I'll go into some features that are nice and you can use on PC. Gyro aiming is very nice, or using the gyro for input. It's not available on the Xbox controller, so you will have to not have it as a core feature, unfortunately, on PC, but it's a very nice feature. There's even a community of gyro aiming on the internet, so people really like this input method. I want to use it in Factorio because it's still a very mouse game, so you have to like select where on the screen you want to build the building and stuff, and having gyro aiming for that would be very nice. I haven't done it yet because there's a lot of math and tweaking, and to make it feel perfectly, it's a lot to be done. So I plan to use that. Touchpads. On Steam Deck, for example, I try to use the touchpads again for like mouse-like input. You can also use them on the PlayStation controller. So if someone connects a PlayStation controller, some people reverse engineer the whole protocols and implement it in SDL. So for example, because we use SDL, I can just use the correct APIs and just use this feature just like that. It's still different handling because Steam Deck basically emulates a mouse. It acts like just a normal trackpad on a laptop. On the controller, it's just an API you need to call on SDL, or well, if you don't use SDL, I don't know what you do. You look at the source code and implement it yourself, possibly. I don't know if any engine supports the feature. Next is vibrations and fancy vibrations. On Nintendo Switch, when I implemented it, they have this thing called HD Rumble, where they have these actuators in the linear actuators in the controllers, and basically you're kind of playing a sound file with the controller, so it's not just a basic vibration. You get all the frequencies, all the details, you have complete control. It's the APIs and everything is centered around playing them like sound files, and they're even generated from sound files. So in my case, I took the explosion sound file, for example. So when that explosion sound plays, there's also an explosion vibration exactly related to that sound. So you basically feel the exact explosion sound in your controllers, and it feels pretty good. And I decided, I thought that there is such a nice features that I wanted to deal with all of these generating of the vibration files and all of that. So that's on Nintendo Switch, and they have their whole APIs and stuff and useful things. They also reverse engineered it on PC. So if you want to use it on PC, you actually can. You don't have such nice API as on Switch. So it's just like send this current vibration information for this current time. So you basically have to implement your own sound player in a way. But it's good to know that it can be done. And yeah, this is the fancy linear actuators which are in the Joy-Cons, the Switch Pro, and the PS5 controller. And if you play some PS5 games, you also know it feels quite nice. And the rest of the controllers just have this very simple motor with a weight, and you don't really have a control over them. It's vibrating or not vibrating. So on Factorio, on Switch, it has all of these nice vibrations. On PC, I didn't re-implement the API basically. So for Joy-Cons on PC, it emulates high rumble and low rumble. And for the rest of the controllers, it's just this normal high rumble and low rumble. So when there's an explosion, there's a file on Switch that plays, and on PC, it's like, okay, vibrate for 50 milliseconds with high rumble. And that's all. These fancy adaptive triggers on the PS5 controllers, it's a very fancy PS5 feature, but again, reverse engineered and implemented in SDL, so you can use it on PC if you really, really want to go the extra mile. Next. So some of you might say, well, what about Steam input? All these problems you mentioned, Steam input is there to save you from all of them. I will try to explain Steam input very briefly. Basically, this should be its own 1 hour presentation, so I will not go into any details. Basically, your controller input, instead of going to your game, first it goes to Steam, and then you talk to the Steam input API through your game, and they solve a lot of things. That's full support or partial support. They emulate an Xbox controller, so if your game just supports normal controllers, it just works automatically through Steam input. So this means, so what does Steam input solve? You don't need to implement button mapping because it has the whole Steam input button mapping thing. You don't need to deal with this Western-Eastern layout, which I said is very important because they have a button in their options, so you can switch that. If you have full support, they even give you the Glyphs, I think, so you can use their Glyphs and all that. So then what's the catch? Well, first obvious catch is it's Steam only, so if you wanted to use it on other platforms, no. If you want to use it outside of Steam, like we do, because we release our game on GOG, or just download it DRM free on our website, because we want to do that. So that's not a possibility for us. The other reason is I don't like Steam input for reasons I can't really go. I don't think it's productive to go into. I try to make a present to go into the details, and I deleted the slides 3 times. So it's maybe very personal preference, but I just don't really.
We'll chat about it later.
Yes, we can chat about it later. Generally, I don't like Steam input. I think the UI for remapping stuff is extremely complicated for the average user. As a nice power tool, it's cool, but I don't know. Plus, they re-implemented everything. So for the Steam Deck, so now for some periods, half the stuff was broken. So if your game relied on it, well, tough luck. So I didn't really like these things when they happened. But I also had people that said, I don't know what you're talking about. We use Steam input. It solved all our problems. So maybe for some it works. For me, it's basically this situation where I have to solve the input for all the controllers. And then Steam comes and says, well, we're going to solve it. We will handle all the controllers, and you just only need to use Steam input. The reality is I need to handle everything and Steam input. So it didn't solve anything for me. Lastly, what about the Steam Deck? Steam Deck is just a PC. So I did the Switch port. I did the PC part. Steam Deck is just a PC, so it just works, right? Not so fast. If you want to be verified, you still have to jump through some hoops. Like I said, the Glyphs. If you should detect that you are on a Steam Deck and show the correct Glyphs, you need to implement their own on-screen keyboard API. Another super annoying thing that I had to deal with was you had these back grips on the Steam Deck, these back buttons. Generically in SDL, and I think in most controllers, they're called paddles, and SDL handles that for me. There are some controllers, the Xbox Pro or something, they have these paddles at the back, and it just works at the hardware level. But because I didn't implement full Steam input support, I used the partial support. So it emulates an Xbox Steam input, takes the controller input from the Steam Deck, it puts it into Steam input, then emulates an Xbox 360 controller. Since it emulates an Xbox 360 controller, that doesn't have the paddles. So I can't use these buttons on the back natively. So I have to do this weird workaround where Steam input takes these back grips on the Steam Deck, then emulates a keyboard shortcut, and then in the game I handle it as a keyboard shortcut. Although it's a controller. And the rest of the buttons in Steam input, they're mapped as, well, left triggers maps to left trigger, right stick maps to right stick, left stick maps to left stick. This is also like why I don't really like Steam input. It's just a controller. Why do you have to put this layer of... Another thing, like I mentioned, the mouse input at the same time. It's very useful in Factorio, and it's a nice feature of the Steam Deck. And the way it works is it emulates a mouse, so I had to do some work to make sure this works correctly. So if you move stuff with the stick, it works. Then if you move it with the mouse, it works. And you can change between these inputs all the time. So it's not perfect, the current implementation, mostly because of technicalities I had with SDL, but it's something that I think it's very good to have, and it currently works okay for Factorio on Steam Deck. So with all that, it got verified. Steam said, Valve said, okay, your game is Steam Deck verified. And yeah, that was the last thing I did for controller support on Factorio. And that is the end of the presentation, quite on time. We have some time for questions, and you can also find me in the hallway after this on the party. I'll be there, so well.
Okay, so for the basic controllers, when you said you have still a mouse to point things and you click like pretty with the mouse. So did you need to make some adjustments for the stick to move correctly the mouse, or are you using raw input? Or did I understand you incorrectly?
I'm not sure what you mean. So basically, when you use a controller, in some situations, you have a virtual mouse. So when you want to place a building, I move the stick up, my virtual cursor moves up with the speed of my stick input, basically a typical virtual cursor implementation. But when I use a mouse, it's just a normal mouse on the screen, and you can use this independently. So I move the cursor here with the mouse, it moves like that, or I move it with the stick and it moves.
Okay, did you have good reviews with that? Because that's a big, I don't know, scare that if you do just give the mouse, it's usually negative reviews sometimes.
Well, you mean, well, I try to avoid this virtual cursor as much as possible. So for example, when you select entities with mouse and keyboard input, you just point the mouse to that entity and click. But with a stick, I just select around your character depending on the stick input. And for this is one of the situations that needed to be handled, that when the game detects mouse input, like actual mouse input, suddenly a cursor appears and you can select with a cursor. When you do stick input, the cursor disappears and it does this automatic selection around you.
Okay, thanks. That's the bit I was missing.
Did you have any problems with UI size or font size, or maybe like different devices have different aspect ratios? Did you have any issues with that?
Yes. At some point we said, okay, we need to design all the UIs for 720p. But that was quite an annoying limitation. So at some point we said, okay, the minimum required size is 1080p. So we design everything for 1080p, and this is 100% UI scale. If you have a smaller screen, in some cases, like some weird laptops, some old laptops, we just scale it down to 75%. It looks kind of bad, but well, you have a very old screen. It's your problem. But then the Nintendo Switch came, and I can't use that excuse anymore. So I had to redo a few things. Some UIs, I had to tweak them so they fit on 720p. So all that limitation that we removed, suddenly I put it back in, and I have to deal with it personally.
Thank you.
So you said that you implemented 80 actions of the 153. So
Yes.
what about the missing 70? Are they completely missing, or can you select them like move cursor to a button in UI and press A?
It's some of them were like, for example, the quick bar at the bottom where it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This was all moved to this weapon wheel, so that's 10 actions out already. I think we also had second row, we also have select the page, so that's like 30 actions already out. Like I said, the title is kind of clickbait. A lot of those actions aren't even mapped on PC. There's stuff like some debug things, some map editor things that aren't mapped. And a lot of them are also overlapping. So
one more question, more technical, about the heuristic you calculate. Are they calculated like raycastic from the button you are at? Like you put rays all around and check what's there? Or are you checking it against all buttons that are there? And is it also going to another panels or only in the panel you are at?
It's going only in the panel you are at, and it's not raycasting, it's just give me all the widgets in the current panel, discard all the ones on the wrong side, and then calculate this heuristic on all the other buttons. So with the raycast, theoretically, like if you hit a button, you shouldn't calculate this other one, but it's micro optimization anyway. So
Okay, thank you.
If I understand it correctly, the player during the game could use both keyboard and the controller, yes?
yes.
So you needed to adapt the UI to switch to the mapping? Like the round menu, you say that are appearing when you are using the controller, and when you are using keyboard, there is a bottom bar.
Okay, so the way it works is this is a option in the options menu. So you go into the controls menu and you select input method, keyboard and mouse or controller. So depending on that option, the UI changes and stuff like that. And in the option you have selected, you can also use the other option. So I select controller mode, but so I have this layout for controller mainly, but I can also map, if I'm a power user, I can also map keyboard shortcuts to some actions. So I can play mainly with a controller and some panels open with the keyboard, for example, if I want. And the same in keyboard and mouse mode. I can select keyboard and mouse and also map stuff to controller buttons if I want. So logical and interaction stuff like which UIs to show, which layouts to show in the situations where they're different. They're controlled by the option in the options menu.
Okay, and
So there's no runtime switching basically, where, okay, I press a button, like it's in some games, yeah? I press a button on the keyboard, suddenly the game is in keyboard and mouse mode. I press a button on the controller, suddenly it's in control mode. That's the ideal way to do it, but because of how I wanted to do it in Factorio, you need to do it in the options menu.
okay, and this option was only in the main menu or also in the, like, during the game options?
It's, well, you can open the options from the main menu or from the game. So it's in both.
So kind of like during the game also you could switch.
And I even do like special things, like you can open the menu always with escape, even in controller mode. So you can do exactly this, and you can use the mouse. So if your controller blows up, you can press escape, switch to keyboard and mouse mode, and it still works.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I get a question about your workflow, because during the presentation, first you talk about Nintendo Switch, and after that you talk that you start from a Xbox 360. And my question is, what was the first thing that you done when you start working on a port for a Factorio?
Well, I did it like this in kind of chronological order for the present, so the presentation makes sense. But I did indeed start with the Nintendo Switch, but I knew I wanted to support it on PC too, and to support all these other controllers. So already when doing that, I knew to use the SDL APIs that are generic and on PC are gonna work. So it's like I was focusing on Nintendo Switch, but already knew that I will have problems with this in the future. So I already implemented those APIs, not fully, but I had this architecture in mind.
Thanks.
Hello. I have a small question about how you went about highlighting items in the environment when the player was using the pad, right? I'm wondering on which premises you were making decision to highlight each item. Was it the angle? Was it the distance? Was it both?
You mean in the UI or in the game world?
In the game actually. And which points did you choose? Let's say when you were measuring the distance, was it at the feet of the character? Was it on the center of the character?
Well, in the game world, it's quite simple. It's just the nearest in that direction to the player character. So the player character is in the center. I press up. The first building up is the one that's selected. Well, it's actually like 4 cones. So I divide the player view in 4 cones. And when you press up, it searches the cone from the bottom to the top. And the first entity that is there, that's the one that's selected.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, so this is more of a hypothetical question. Some games are more console friendly and others are more PC friendly, right? So Factorio is obviously a PC game by heart. Yeah. So if you had this difficult task of basically creating a control system for a game that was set up in a different way. But if you were making a game that's basically a PC game, by heart from scratch with the controller in mind, would it be any different than how you approached it?
Hard to say. I would say basically you would have to deal with, the best way is to just deal with these as separate as possible, because the worst thing is these games that are console ports called that I think Fallout and even Starfield, I think, is an example of they did the same input on both, and on PC the UI feels super bad because it's designed for a controller, or basically it's designed for both with minimal differences. So you feel like you're getting the short end of the stick on the PC. So ideally you try to design with both separately in mind as much as possible. It's a lot of work, but that's how you should do it. And obviously it's up to you and how much time you want to dedicate of how many things you want them to stay the same. Here it's obviously that mouse and keyboards takes precedence. 90-something% of our players are playing with mouse and keyboards, so obviously this is sacred, and nowhere in what I changed I tried to change nothing that would never negatively affect mouse and keyboard. And that meant also, because the short time I did perfect controller support, but yeah, that was our case. So I guess it's just a case-by-case basis.
Thanks.
I think that's all, but okay. It's up to the organizers.
One more thing, like you are talking about short time, but how much time actually you spent on this?
Hard to say. I don't remember, like it was so long ago. I think the whole Switch port took 2 years, maybe.
But 2 years of one developer time?
Yes.
Wow.
So, but that meant everything. That meant all the technical stuff, graphics, even stuff like publishing a Nintendo Direct that took a lot of time, putting it on the store, dealing with all the Nintendo emails, and so
yeah, but if you like could estimate, like, okay, just do console control for the Nintendo Switch and PC, and like, could you estimate even?
I would say maybe a year of developer.
Okay.
And keep in mind that in Factorio we do things quite slow, so I mean, the game has been in development for 11 years, so we take our time. Yeah, I think this is all. Find me in the hallway, and at the party I'm very happy to talk about all controller stuff or all the adventures you had with Lot Check on Nintendo Switch and stuff like this.